30 pieces, 30 countries, and no claims, no demands, no face for the world to blame. By the time the last item was returned, the pattern was no longer deniable. Governments had tried denying it anyway. Museums had tried minimizing it. Commentators had tried shrinking it into argument, theft, activism, provocation, justice, stunt, warning. None of the words held long enough, because every time the world found a word small enough to contain what was happening, another community found a larger one. Home. That was the word that mattered. Not everywhere, not from everyone, not without dispute, but often enough, loudly enough, and deeply enough to alter the air. Across the continent, people were no longer asking only what had been returned. They were asking why it had ever been kept away. They were asking who had decided memory needed permission. They were asking what else had been renamed, hidden, delayed, or politely refused. The returns had done what they were meant to do. They had not solved anything. They had awakened something. And awakening was never the same as control. That was why the five of them did not meet in Accra, Lagos, Addis Ababa, Nairobi, Dakar, Cairo, Johannesburg, or anywhere else the world might expect serious people to gather after changing the emotional temperature of a continent. They knew better. The place where everyone was looking was the last place they would stand together. 3 days after the final return, the message came through the private layer. Not an address, not a city written plainly, not a date anyone else could have used. 4 fragments only. A lake that burned. A number they had used once and never written down. A line from a book Malcolm had mocked in their second year. And a time that did not belong to the place where any of them currently stood. The location had been chosen the way all their locations were chosen now. Not announced, solved. Chicago was cold when Malcolm arrived. Not winter cold, not the kind that announced itself with snow and drama. A sharper cold. A wind off the lake that moved through the city as if it had legal authority. He arrived 2 days early and became forgettable on purpose. That had always been one of his gifts, though no one had recognized it properly when he was younger. People remembered Malcolm when he wanted them to. They remembered the laugh, the ease, the brightness he allowed into a room. But he had learned long ago that charm wasn't only for attention. Properly used, it was also camouflage. He was polite in cafes, unhurried at crossings, helpful with doors, brief with strangers. He dressed well enough to belong and plainly enough not to matter. By the second day, he had moved through 3 neighborhoods, 2 hotel lobbies where he was not staying, 1 public library, and a station where everyone was going somewhere and no one was watching anyone long enough to remember why. Maya arrived next, though not by the route expected. 1 bag, no unnecessary weight, no jewelry that caught light, no shoes chosen for anything but movement. She hated cities that pretended their systems worked because the skyline photographed well. Chicago did not pretend as much as some. It showed its edges if you knew where to look. She noticed the alley before the building, the cameras before the door, the delivery entrances, the rhythm of garbage pickup, the neighbor who smoked beneath the back stairs and noticed everything while pretending to notice nothing. Only then did she go inside. Ashanti arrived after dark, wearing the calm of someone who had learned that history often moved best when no one announced it. She carried a satchel that looked academic because it was academic. That was the advantage of certain truths. They hid best when left in plain sight. The rental sat above a quiet street, in a neighborhood busy enough to absorb arrivals and ordinary enough not to invite memory. No lobby, no front desk, no staff paid to notice faces, a narrow stairwell, old wood, a radiator that complained before it warmed the room. The reservation had not been made in any of their names. That was not paranoia. It was discipline. Convenience, Chadwick had once said, was exposure wearing a friendly face. He was already inside when the others arrived. No one asked how long he had been there. The room was not impressive. That was its strength. A table large enough for documents, windows with cheap blinds, a kitchen with mismatched mugs, a couch no one trusted enough to sit on for long. The kind of place hundreds of people might pass through in a year, and none of them would describe the same way twice. Kwame arrived last, or seemed to. Malcolm looked up as the door closed behind him. You know, for a man who dislikes drama, you have a gift for entrances. Kwame removed his gloves. I came through the door. Yes, Malcolm said. Eventually. Maya did not smile, but something in her face softened by 1 degree. Ashanti set her satchel on the table. Chadwick locked the door again, then checked a device in his palm, then said nothing, which meant the room was as clean as he was willing to call it. For a moment, they simply stood there. 5 people who had once been students arguing in borrowed rooms. 5 people who had spent years becoming useful. 5 people who had just altered the emotional temperature of a continent and given the world nothing to arrest, nothing to negotiate with, and nothing to name. Malcolm was the first to speak. 30 pieces, he said. Maya answered, 30 countries. Ashanti added, no failed returns. Chadwick looked at the table. No confirmed exposure. Kwame took the empty chair at the far side. Then part 1 is complete. No one celebrated. The quiet after his words was not satisfaction. It was weight, because completion was dangerous. Completion meant evidence. Completion meant response. Completion meant that what had once been possible to dismiss as a scattered set of incidents could now be understood as sequence, and sequence implied design. Maya opened the first folder. The returns generated more movement than projected, she said. Not physically, emotionally. Public gatherings in 22 locations, secondary gatherings in diaspora communities, informal student assemblies in at least 11 cities, museum attendance spikes, archive requests, local elders being interviewed without state coordination, youth groups translating object histories into short-form video faster than institutions can respond. Malcolm leaned back slightly. That part is good. That part is volatile, Maya corrected. It can be both. It is both, she said. That is the problem. Ashanti placed a second folder beside Maya's. The language is shifting. That matters more than the numbers. Kwame turned to her. How? At first they said stolen objects, Ashanti said, then returned artifacts. Now I am seeing something else. People are saying memory, proof, evidence. Some are saying inheritance. Malcolm nodded slowly. Inheritance is powerful. Inheritance creates claim, Ashanti said. Claim creates responsibility. Responsibility creates politics. And politics creates opportunists, Chadwick said. No one disagreed. He slid a screen to the center of the table. Not a laptop anyone could buy. Not quite a tablet. Something thinner, duller, and purpose-built enough to look unfinished. Attention has changed, he said. Before the final 5 returns, most external analysis treated the events as cultural security problem. Embarrassing, expensive, containable. After the 30th, the language shifted. They are no longer asking only what was returned. Maya looked at him. They are asking how. Yes, Malcolm exhaled. There it is. Chadwick tapped once. A list appeared, stripped of names but not categories. Museum consortiums, private collections, insurance networks, diplomatic back channels, security contractors, resource councils, policy institutes. Ashanti's eyes narrowed. Resource councils? The smart ones understand before the sentimental ones do, Chadwick said. The objects are not the threat. Kwame finished the thought. The coordination is. A radiator clanged in the corner, loud enough to make the room feel briefly ordinary. Malcolm stood and moved toward the window, but did not part the blinds. So we knew this would happen, he said. Yes, Maya replied. It is still irritating to be correct. That, Chadwick said, is not a strategic category. It should be. Ashanti ignored them both. Her attention remained on Kwame. The returns awakened memory, she said. But memory will not remain pure because we want it to. It is already being interpreted, claimed, simplified, sold. Some are calling this justice. Some are calling it theft. Some are calling it a warning. Some are already trying to attach themselves to it. Maya turned a page, which brings us to part two. The words settled differently from part one. Part one had been movement, quiet, disciplined, material. Part two would require voices. That made it more dangerous. Kwame looked around the table. The return was never the destination. No, Malcolm said. It was the opening. And openings close, Maya added, if nothing moves through them. Ashanti removed a slim packet of notes from her satchel. Then we decide what moves. For the first hour, they did not speak of unity directly. That was intentional. Unity was too large a word to enter early. It made rooms defensive. It invited applause from people who wanted to be seen agreeing, and suspicion from people who feared being absorbed. It carried too much history, too much failure, too much rhetoric, too much betrayal disguised as vision. So they spoke first of conditions, what the returns had revealed, which communities responded before governments did, which officials moved to protect the objects, and which moved to control the story, which religious leaders had opened their doors, which traditional authorities had recognized meaning before paperwork, which ministers had asked the right questions privately while issuing cautious statements publicly, which regions were ready for dialogue, which were insulted by the assumption that they should be. North Africa required care, not distance, care. Malcolm said it first. We cannot speak as if the continent has one wound and one memory. That would be lazy, Ashanti nodded, and dangerous. There are leaders who will hear unity as erasure, he continued. Others will hear it as a trap. Some will hear it as sub-Saharan language, being dressed as continental destiny. Some will ask whether this includes them only when numbers are needed, and excludes them when identity is being defined. Then we answer before the question hardens, Maya said. No, Ashanti said. We listen before we answer. That quieted the room. Kwame looked at her. Say more. Ashanti folded her hands over the notes. The returns gave people proof, but proof does not automatically become trust. If part two is alignment, then the first act cannot be persuasion. It has to be witness. Malcolm smiled faintly. That sounds like you are volunteering me to speak less. I am asking all of us to speak less. A tragic escalation. Maya pointed to the map spread across the table. It showed no borders at first glance, only routes, nodes, and layered markings. We need parallel tracks, she said. Cultural, political, logistical, youth, legal, economic. Not public, not yet. Conversations, questions, conditions. With whom? Chadwick asked. Not only heads of state, Maya said immediately. Too slow, too exposed, too performative. Ministers in specific portfolios, regional coordinators, port authorities, archivists, legal scholars, traditional leaders, religious authorities, infrastructure people, diaspora organizers, student networks, people who can carry meaning without needing a camera. Malcolm leaned over the table, and people with enough authority to say no usefully. Maya glanced at him. Explain. A useless yes is worse than a serious no, he said. A serious no tells us where the wound is. Ashanti looked at him for a moment, then nodded. That belongs in the framework. Chadwick did not look pleased. The more people we involve, the larger the surface area. Yes, Maya said. That was not agreement. It is reality, she replied. Part two cannot be executed by 5 people in closed rooms. No, Chadwick said, but it can be destroyed by 5 careless conversations. Kwame's voice entered quietly. Then there will be no careless conversations. He did not say it like a hope. He said it like a standard. They began drafting the question, not the speech. The question, because speeches told people what to think. Questions revealed what people were ready to carry. Malcolm wrote the first version. What would Africa become if restoration did not end with objects? Ashanti crossed out become and wrote remember. Maya crossed out did not end and wrote had to continue. Chadwick stared at the page as if the sentence itself were a security risk. Kwame read the final version aloud. What would Africa remember itself capable of if restoration had to continue beyond objects? No one spoke for a moment. Then Malcolm said softly, that one opens doors. Or closes them, Chadwick said. Good, Ashanti replied. Either way, we learned something. By the second hour, the room had split into regions, roles, and risks. Malcolm would take the first set of political conversations, not leaders at podiums, not presidents surrounded by handlers, quiet rooms, people who understood that public language often arrived long after private decisions had already been made. Ashanti would move through legitimacy, cultural leaders, legal minds, archive directors, historians who had spent their careers being politely ignored until the returned objects made their ignored work suddenly useful. Maya would handle structure, ports, corridors, institutional capacity, food routes, education exchange, digital infrastructure, the practical bones of anything that hoped to outlive emotion. Chadwick would not be absent from those conversations. That was how Malcolm phrased it. Chadwick objected immediately. I will be absent. No, Malcolm said. You will be invisible. There is a difference. I dislike that you know that. You dislike most accurate things. Chadwick's gaze moved to Kwame. If they move into outreach, I need full control over channel discipline. Maya almost laughed. You will not get full control over people. I am aware. That is why people remain the primary flaw in every system. Ashanti looked at him calmly. People are also the point. That does not improve their reliability. Kwame lifted one hand, not commandingly, enough. The room settled. Chadwick is right about exposure, he said. Maya is right about scale. Ashanti is right about witness. Malcolm is right about doors. None of those truths cancel the others. That had always been Kwame's gift, not to make conflict disappear, to make it useful. He stood and walked to the table. Part two is not recruitment, he said. Not yet. It is not declaration, not formation, not a flag, not a summit, not a movement people can join because joining is easier than building. His eyes moved across them. Part two is discernment. Malcolm repeated it quietly. Discernment. We learn who understands the return as possession, Kwame said, who understands it as performance, who understands it as inheritance, who understands it as responsibility, who wants control, who wants healing, who wants leverage, who wants continuity. Ashanti's expression sharpened. And who fears continuity? Yes, Kwame said. Outside, a siren passed and faded. The city swallowed it whole. For a while, no one spoke, because beneath every category and route and contact list, beneath every question about leaders and ministers and elders and youth, something larger had begun to show itself. The returns had not created unity. They had exposed the need for it. That was different and more dangerous. 6 hours ahead, in Paris, another meeting had already begun. There were 4 people at the table. Only 3 mattered. The fourth poured water and heard nothing, because she had been trained by money to misunderstand silence as privacy. The room overlooked nothing ordinary. That was intentional. Some people chose anonymity by disappearing into crowds. Others chose power by surrounding themselves with beauty old enough to make theft look like inheritance. The man at the head of the table had silver hair, soft hands, and the calm of someone who had spent his life near power without ever needing to win an election. He served on boards whose names sounded charitable in public and strategic in private. Museums trusted him. Collectors feared his memory. Governments found him useful because he knew how to say unacceptable things in acceptable rooms. He had read every report on the returns, not because he cared what had come home, because he cared what had moved unseen. The sentimental interpretation is distracting everyone, he said. Across from him sat a woman with a ministerial title from a country she often described as beloved and treated as an asset. She had built her career on heritage language, investment language, development language, unity language. She could make ambition sound like service without pausing for breath. The people are emotional, she said. Emotion can be shaped. To your advantage? Asked the third person. He was younger than the others. Not young, younger. A strategist by profession and a divider by instinct. He understood the internet not as technology, but as appetite. He knew which wounds could be reopened with the right phrase, which truths could be bent without breaking, and which communities could be convinced that insult was hiding inside invitation. The woman smiled. To stability, she said. The younger man laughed once. Of course. The silver-haired man ignored the exchange. This is not about artifacts, he said. No, the woman agreed. It is about ownership of the narrative. The younger man leaned back. It is about suspicion. Narrative is too polite. If people are suspicious enough, they will do the work for us. The man at the head of the table looked at him then. Explain. The returns are popular because they feel pure, the younger man said. So we contaminate the feeling, not the objects, the feeling. Make North Africa question whether this language includes them. Make smaller nations question whether larger ones intend to dominate the symbolism. Make traditional leaders question whether governments will seize the returned pieces. Make governments question whether traditional leaders are being used to bypass the state. Make the diaspora loud enough to irritate the continent and useful enough to be blamed by it. The woman's smile faded slightly. That could become difficult to control. That is the point, he said. Control is your language. Fracture is mine. The silver-haired man lifted his glass but did not drink. What do you need? Time, the younger man said. Access. A few commentators who believe they are independent. A few officials who believe they are underappreciated. A few historians willing to be offended on camera. Some old maps. Some old wounds. New captions. The woman looked toward the covered windows. "And what do you need from me?" she asked the silver-haired man. He finally drank. "A face," he said. "Not immediately. Soon. The movement has none. That makes it strong for now. It will also make people anxious. When they begin asking, who speaks for this moment, you will be ready to answer." She understood. That was why she had come. In Chicago, Ashanti paused mid-sentence. Malcolm noticed first. "What?" She looked down at the notes. "We are assuming opposition will begin with accusation," she said. "Theft, illegality, security. That language is already active." Maya watched her. But? But accusation may not be the first real attack. Chadwick looked up. "Capture." "Yes," Ashanti said. "Someone will try to become the respectable version of what people think this is." Malcolm's face changed. Not dramatically. Enough. "A spokesperson, or a protector," Maya said. "Or a stabilizing force," Ashanti added. "That would be the phrase." Kwame did not move, but the room felt colder. Chadwick turned the screen slightly. "There are already 3 names appearing across separate channels, not publicly connected." Malcolm stared at him. "You were going to mention that when?" "When it was useful." "It is useful now." "Yes," Chadwick said. "That is why I am mentioning it." Maya stepped closer. 3? "One external," Chadwick said. "One internal. One informational." Malcolm let out a slow breath. "A counterweight." "No," Kwame said. They all looked at him. "A counter team." The words landed with the force of recognition. Of course. They should have known. History was never guarded by one person. Control was never preserved by one hand. Systems did not defend themselves through villains. They defended themselves through networks, incentives, ambitions, fears, and people who believed themselves reasonable while protecting unreasonable things. Maya closed the folder in front of her. "Then part 2 is already contested." "It was contested before we named it," Ashanti said. Malcolm returned to the table. The humor had left his face now, not permanently, but completely. "Then we moved before they defined the room." Chadwick's answer came immediately. "We move carefully. We can do both." "We must," Maya said. Kwame looked at the map again. Not at borders, at routes, at people, at the invisible lines between memory and structure. "When the first conversations begin," he said, "we do not ask for allegiance. We do not ask for belief. We do not ask anyone to disappear into a version of Africa too small to hold them." Ashanti nodded. "We ask what restoration requires next." "And if they ask who we are," Malcolm said. Kwame's eyes lifted. "We tell them the truth." Even Chadwick looked unsettled by that. Kwame continued. "Not our names, not our structure, the truth." Maya understood first. That the return was not an ending. "Yes," Ashanti said it next. "That memory has responsibilities," Malcolm added. "That unity cannot be forced. But fragmentation has been profitable for too long." Chadwick looked at them as if the room had become dangerously poetic. "And after that?" Kwame's voice was quiet. "After that, we listened." The 3rd hour passed, without anyone noticing. Outside, Chicago kept moving. Trains, wind, traffic. Strangers carrying groceries. Couples arguing softly on sidewalks. Someone laughing too loudly beneath a streetlight. A city full of people disappearing into each other's lives, without knowing what had gathered above them, in a rented room with bad heating and covered windows. By dawn, part 2 had a shape, not a plan in the old sense, something more careful, a listening sequence, a map of conversations, a test of readiness, a way to learn whether the joy of return could become something stronger than joy without being corrupted by those who wanted to own it, sell it, divide it, or put it back to sleep. Before they left, they removed every trace that mattered. Paper became ash in a container Maya had chosen because it looked like nothing and functioned exactly as needed. Devices were wiped, separated, and returned to different pockets. Surfaces were cleaned not obsessively but thoroughly. Mugs returned to cabinets. Chairs placed not as they had found them, but as ordinary renters might leave them. When he finally stepped outside, the city had already begun its morning. People moved past him without looking. A woman in a red scarf checked her phone. A cyclist cursed at a cab. A child dragged a backpack too large for his shoulders. Steam rose from a street grate and vanished into cold air. No one knew him. That was good. Far away, the returned objects sat in rooms that had begun to change around them. People would come to see them. Some would come with pride, some with grief, some with suspicion, some with hunger for what might come next. And elsewhere, in rooms just as quiet as the one the team had left behind, others had begun preparing their answer. They had returned more than objects. They had returned proof. And proof, once placed back in the hands of its people, could become dangerous to anyone who depended on forgetting.